Alright, hey everybody, my name's Elliot. Gamer tag on PlayStation is Space Beagle X. And I made a Pong game, and I'm going to show you what it is, and walk you through how I put it together. This isn't going to be like a step-by-step tutorial, but it's more just like a overview of what I tried, what I didn't try, and or rather what worked, what didn't work, and how it all came together. I'm going to back out to the stream itself, play it so you can see what we're looking at here. And actually, let me restart the progress. Whole thing. Alright, so there is like a title card. Plays when you start the game. And you have this beautiful looking intro screen, which is mostly just version update notes. We'll go through how I put that together and then how the gameplay starts when you hit the circle button. Now, I only have one controller plugged in, so that's why the other paddle isn't moving. I don't have any AI yet. It's pretty much a two-player game only. You can see scoring is working. I move the left analog stick up and down. That's how you move the paddle. And we've got some animated background elements. And of course some music and sound effects. So pretty simple. Get through here. It goes up to 11. Alright, and then there's the last screen. So a player 1 wins screen or player 2 if player 2 wins. So there's no losers in Pong. Right? Okay. And then the game restarts. So let's get into it. I'm going to exit the creation and go right into the main scene here. Go to edit it. So if I back up here, and I'm not going to take the time to explain what Dreams is. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you kind of know what the gist is. It's a game creation tool for PlayStation. So anyway, here's the scene. This is more or less how I started things off, was with the paddle. So if we look at the paddle, it is just a extended cube, and there's some material properties on it. Not a whole lot to say there. And then the first thing I wanted to figure out was how can I get this thing to move up and down. So if we take a look, oops, I added a microchip here. And I figured, okay, well, I know I need controller input, so I'll add the controller sensor gadget. That was pretty straightforward. And then I needed to figure out how to move the dang thing. And I tried looking at making it a puppet like you would with a character, but it just didn't work for what I needed it to do. And then also, when I hit play, it just fell, but it was hard to tell that it was falling because the camera was moving with it. So there were a lot of issues all at first. So let's go through how I ended up solving the paddle controls. We'll go one thing at a time. So if we look at the controller sensor gadget, you can see I've got a couple of things hooked up. So the right stick, I guess I forgot to demo that. The right stick, for testing purposes, allows you to move the second player. So we'll come back to that one. The left stick is the main way that you control the paddle. And then important here is define which player can control that. Otherwise, anyone that picks up a controller can control your paddle. And then as far as possession visual, I set it to hidden, and I believe set it to possessible, and there should be an auto possess somewhere. I don't remember where that is. Come back to that one. Alright, so then we've got the left controller output going to a splitter. And the reason we have it going to a splitter is because If we didn't, it would allow you to move it in any direction, or it would try and take the input and it wouldn't know what to do with it. I don't remember exactly what happened. Then I hook it up to an advanced mover. So there's a couple things going on here. The advanced mover, um, this is how I figured out how to get it to work. I don't know if this is the best approach, but I set all the damp to basically 100% in any direction, and then the movement strength to 84. And the important thing is, because I'm using the splitter, we're taking the output from the controller and then splitting it into X and Y, or left and right, and up and down movements. And then we're taking the output of just the Y port and moving it into the mover. So that's how you can move the controller, or the paddle rather. I don't know why I did that, because you can't actually control much when you hit it in play mode. So anyway, other things here were some issues where when I eventually started putting the scene together, when the paddle would collide with the top or the bottom, it would sort of like shake around. And that's because by default, like, everything's got physics in Dreams, which is great if you're making a third-person adventure game or like a first-person shooter. Not so great for a retro-style arcade game. So there's a couple of things here in the physical properties. Are somewhere here. Physical properties. So it is movable, it is visible, it is collidable, and it has 100% friction. That was to cut down on some of the wobbliness, and 100% density. And then ignore gravity is on. That was the most important thing there. Without that, it would just fall because it's pointing up. So that's pretty much more or less how keep doing that. More or less how the paddles put together. I also have a gyroscope on here that is to try to attempt to keep it upright. I don't know if that actually ended up helping. And then a force applier, which was kind of an overcorrection for how the ball worked, which I'll come back to in a little bit. Player 2 setup is exactly the same. And then this thing here is a great little component I found called signal display. I believe the user's name that created it is Fort. And basically what it allows you to do is drag anything into it and it will output it as a variable. It's really, really helpful for troubleshooting why something may or may not be working. So if I were just to take like I'm going to do that a lot, I apologize. If I were to take any value here, like let's say the Y output, and plug it in here, and I think I have to back out to play it so you can see what it does. You can tell, like, when I'm pushing the analog stick, it's giving me a value, so it looks like it operates on value of 1 to -1. When I'm pushing up, it's -1, pushing down, it's 1. So that's a really handy component that you can grab. You just search for signal display. Leave that connection. And then the next thing I put together was the game board, which I was trying to go without doing. I figured maybe I could set bounds and stuff like that, like if I were making an actual retro game. But because we're sort of playing in a physics-based world, I figure, well, why not just like literally build a game board? So if you zoom in inside of here, um, there's a back to it. It's enclosed on all sides, and then there's actually an invisible front. So if I go and unhide it, you can see that there's a visible front to it. So that's just there for collision purposes. But that ended up containing both the paddle and the ball. So let's go take a look at the ball, which is just like a sphere. And then there's a couple of things going on. You might be wondering why there's a green thing. We'll come back to that. So if I can get to it, it's a little tricky. Yep. Let me enable grid snapping. Okay, there we go. So now we've got the ball's logic, and there are a number of different things going on here. The emitter's disabled, that's an effect I was trying to add. Let's start with the simplest thing, which is the sound effect. So there's a trigger zone on it. If I tap on it, um, it I thought it would show up. There it is. Oh, it did show up. It's just very small. So basically, there's an area of collision that it's looking for, and when it connects with one of the paddles, it plays a sound effect. Uh, no, that's wrong. Sorry, that's on the paddles themselves. No, I am right. It is, the sound effect is on the ball. That's all that's doing. It's just checking to see when the zone just outside of the ball collides. It plays that sound effect. Couple of other things. Most important is getting it to move automatically. So I'll start here and then we'll sort of work backwards. This mover component, or gadget rather, is what triggers the initial momentum. So when the game starts, it just moves on its own. So that has to come from somewhere, but it's deactivated by default, and you can see some like kind of crazy looking logic here. Um, there's a couple of things to take into consideration. So at first when I was making it, it was only moving to the left, so player one either had an advantage or a disadvantage depending on how you look at it. So I needed a way to randomize it. And so I added this randomized gadget, and this was a little tricky to figure out at first, but it makes a lot of sense now. So you're taking the input to randomize, and then you're actually calling the randomization feature. I didn't realize you actually need to trigger that randomization. Otherwise, you'll keep calling the same value over and over again every time you power it. Um, so then the other thing here is a gate and a timer. And it's taking an input from a couple of places, which I guess I'll just, it's probably easier to just explain that rather than try and show it up. Um, so the timer happens after one of two things happen. You either press the circle button to close the main menu, or you score a point. So after that, you don't want the ball to reappear immediately. You want a timer to start counting down. So it goes, I think it's just like a second delay. And then when it's done, it sends a timer finished pulse. So it's just a quick signal to then flag something. So that sends power, or that's rather, it sends the input to this gate here, which is blocking power to the other things. So back out here. And then when that happens, it sends the input to the randomize, which then passes along the result to which direction to move. The other thing that goes on is when that timer finishes, it calls the randomize feature. So now that number from basically 1 or 2 is randomized, and then that gate gets flipped and it provides power, and then there you go. In retrospect, I might be able to remove that gate, but come back to that. Other thing here is the teleporter. So the teleporter happens when you score a point. We'll come back to where the input's coming from for that. If we take a look at the counter just goes up to 1. This, I believe, was set so that it can happen on an event instead of a constant signal, because otherwise it would keep teleporting the ball where it needed to go. So then on output of that, 2 things happen. The counter gets full and then it resets it, and it also sends the signal to the ball teleporter, which is this green little gadget here. So back to where it started from, it sets it back up, and then after the point has been scored, it runs through all of this logic to then move the ball automatically. Perfectly not confusing, right? So let's take a look at um, one of these colliders here, which I believe is now in. I think I have to. Yeah, it's a group. That's why I didn't see it. So inside the group for the game board, there is a trigger zone. I keep calling it a collider. Um, that's what they're called in Unity. But in here, you've got a trigger zone. So basically, it's detecting when the ball comes within this area. Might be wondering why it's larger than just the side. I was finding that it was a little buggy if I tried to make it absolutely accurate. This is called like a hitbox in fighting games and things like that. You sort of extend the area just around or tweak it a little bit to just improve the gameplay. And so this is just, it's not looking to detect anything specific, but when it detects um, something, I don't actually know how that works without it being detected. That's kind of, I'd have to look into that. Might have found a minor bug. So it's not looking for anything in specific. It is looking for a scene element, and that might be how I determined it. I don't remember. Alright, just open a bunch of menus. Okay, so it is looking for a scene element. Um, oh, there it is. So the scene element to detect is patched to the ball object directly, and then here, when it's detected, it fires a couple of events. Let's take a look at that. Dock this. First thing you might be thinking that it is firing an event to would be the ball logic that we were just looking at, and you would be absolutely correct. So I'll try to open that up again here. There we go. Okay. So when that collision is detected, that's where that gets patched into, and it fires. This just basically patches that into it. It's a just way to organize it. And so then that will set the counter for the teleport and also reset the timer to make the ball move. A lot of effort to just explain that, but you know, here we are. And we've got a UI here, and the UI microchip just takes into consideration the score. So when I mouse over it, you can see, select it, you can see the score here. So depending on which one was triggered, depends on the score that gets added. So that's why there are two inputs here. There's two scores, and there is one of these trigger zones on each side. The one we're looking at is for player 2, so that one gets patched into scene modifier. All right, let's get a better look at that. The score modifier, and that will increment it. So it'll add 1 to the player's score, and you don't have to patch that to anything else. That just keeps that updated in memory, and then you've got the score, so it's looking for it here. Score name, P2 score. Over here, that's the name I have here, so that's how it knows. You don't need to like drag a cable to it. So then that gets updated. And that is connected to the score displayer, is the one in the upper right-hand corner. And then the last thing here is it's doing a check here. There's a calculator. And the calculator is basically just checking to see if the score is greater than the value of 10, which would mean the player scored 11 points, which would mean that they're the winner of the game. So if that ever becomes a true condition, then a door appears and it takes you to one of two scenes, the player win screen or the player 2 win screen. Last thing in here, I'm not going to cover the animation here. This is pretty basic stuff. There is a timeline, and I have them moving on a loop. Not a whole lot to it. The scene, I'm not really going to go over. We can take a look at what's in this. Pretty basic. I have my lights. I have the music timeline in there, and the mixing settings, and a couple of visual effects, sun and sky settings. Microchips are a good way to organize anything. You don't have to just put logic in them. So there's one tip that I discovered. And then the last thing here, man, I keep doing that with microchips. The last thing here is the logic to display that start screen. So when you hit play, this comes up. And this started off as a way for me to just keep track of the patch notes, but it could be eventually replaced with just a straight up title screen that appears over the gameplay without having to like create a whole new scene. In retrospect, it's probably easier to just create a screen, but this also works. So a couple of things, there's some text objects in here, and then let me back out of that. Go in here, and then we've got the interface logic itself. So it's waiting for an input. So there's another controller sensor here, and it's just waiting for the user to press circle button. When they press the circle button, it doesn't matter if they hold it in or whatever. That's what the counter is for. So the counter starts a counter, increments it to 1, so it just detects it as like a button press. And then that causes the text to fade out. It fades in automatically. I'll go into this real quick. The fade in here is just an animated timeline, couple of keyframes, and you can't see them because the objects aren't selected, but it's all of these text objects. I started with one, and then I animated it, and when I cloned them, it retained the animated properties. Kind of cool. So if you're going to be animating a bunch of things, it might be easier to animate one and then clone it. And then the fade out, and then the last thing here is there are two cables coming out. So there's the fade out animation, and then there's this one, which then goes all the way, if you guessed it, goes to the ball logic. That was the other input that I didn't cover. Should just keep this one open all the time. It's kind of hard to access. So yeah, when you press the circle button on the controller, it then goes into here, which then starts this whole chain of logic. So same logic being reused with two different inputs. If you're a programmer, this is basically just a function. But if you're not, it is kind of easy to understand visually. I glossed over things pretty quickly. It's definitely not like a beginner's tutorial or anything. It's not even really a tutorial. It's just how I broke down putting this project together. And I guess the last thing would be showing how this dream or this scene plays into the whole dream. So if I back out, back up even further, and look at this. Go to edit. These are the different scenes and how it was put together. So not much to it. This is just an animation, that title screen, and then there's a door at the end of the animation that appears on the timeline that I then map to the main game itself. And then the two doors that I went over with the score just go to another animation, And at the end of that timeline, doors appear that take you all the way back to the start. So you can just keep playing and playing and playing. And that is about it for Pong. I'll probably continue to update it a little bit, add some polish, maybe some fun elements or effects. But yeah, pretty much a complete game. Thanks for watching.